Well, welcome back to our final Advent online Bible study. We are looking at the four names of the Messiah given in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And in this last session, we'll look at the fourth name, and this is what it says in Isaiah 9, verse 6. It says, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, and Prince of Peace." When we read this, we have to ask the question, what does it mean for Jesus to be our peace, particularly as we look at a world where there's lots of pain and suffering? 2020, for example, has been hard for all of us, and we've all suffered, even those of us that are following Jesus. And so what does it mean for Jesus to be our Prince of Peace in a world that doesn't seem to have a lot of peace? Well, to briefly answer that, we're going to look at a passage in Matthew chapter 10, which talks about this idea of Jesus being our peace in the midst of a difficult and broken world. In Matthew 10, Jesus is talking to his disciples about the need to acknowledge and to follow him. And then he says this in chapter 10, verse 34. He says, "Don't assume that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." And then he gives some examples about how he is more important than your father and your mother and your family, that Jesus is the most important thing in our lives. And then he concludes by saying this in verse 38 and 39. And he says, "And whoever doesn't take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Anyone who finds his life will lose it. And anyone who loses his life because of me will find it." And so what he is saying here is that Jesus is over all and comes first. He is preeminent, he is strong, he is mighty, as we've seen in some of the other names of the Messiah given in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. But he is over all things, and he is the most important thing in the world. And so what this means for us firstly is this, that Jesus is in control. So this is the good news, that he is king, that he is Lord, that he is to be first in our life because he is in control over all things. So as we try to wrestle with this tension of Jesus being our peace, and yet living in a world where there doesn't seem to be peace, the first thing we need to understand is that he is in control. And this impacts what it means for Jesus to be the Prince of Peace. Because what we see happening here is that Jesus is even saying that as you follow me, hard things may happen to you. And so even in this context, Jesus is saying, as you follow me, hard and difficult things will happen to you. And so what does it mean for Jesus to be our Prince of Peace if following him can even mean difficult things happen to us? Well, one of the things that we see is that God doesn't promise circumstantial peace, but peace within your circumstances. So he doesn't promise here circumstantial peace, but he promises peace within your circumstances, that even as you follow Jesus, and maybe even following Jesus makes life harder for you. You may miss out on certain things or certain promotions or be made fun of in certain ways or certain things may not go your way simply because you are a follower of Jesus. What this doesn't mean is that following Jesus means everything will be peaceful for you. But what it does mean is that God promises not circumstantial peace, but peace within the difficulties that you're experiencing. And in fact, Jesus says as much in John chapter 16. In these famous verses where Jesus is talking about how he will one day conquer the world, he says this in John 16, verse 32 and 33. He says, "Indeed, an hour is coming and has come when each of you will be scattered to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone because the Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world." Right? Jesus himself is saying, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to leave and essentially ascend back into God's kingdom. Of course, at this time, the disciples are kind of confused, but he's saying that in me, you will have peace, even though you will suffer. In other words, what we see happening here and why Jesus can be our Prince of Peace is because what is shown to us is that Jesus did not come to bring peace. He is peace. Jesus did not come to bring peace. He is peace. which means in the midst of our sufferings and our difficulties and our doubts and the hardships that we've all experienced, particularly through this COVID season, is that following Jesus does not mean your life will be peaceful, but it does mean you can experience peace in the midst of the difficulties, that you can have joy and you can have hope and you can trust that the Lord is good even in the midst of hard times because He is our peace. He Himself, not following Him makes our life peaceful, but knowing Him is what brings us peace in the midst of difficult time. And so the Christmas season is all about this truth, that God has come in the form of a man named Jesus to do for us what we could never do for ourselves, to live a life that we could never live, to die and resurrect and ascend back into heaven on our behalf, that God gives us grace and mercy that we could never obtain through the sacrifice and the gift of His Son. And so, no matter what you are faced with in this current season of life, peace can still be found, not in your circumstances, but in Jesus. Jesus is our peace, and so we can celebrate even in the midst of dark times.